This is a work of complete fiction created purely for entertainment purposes. All characters, events, organizations, and locations are entirely imaginary. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. He divorced her without looking back. 5 years later, a little girl called him Daddy. The morning Ethan Calloway signed the divorce papers, he didn't read them, he just signed. His mother, Victoria, slid the pen across the marble desk with a calm, practiced hand, and he took it without looking up, without looking back, without looking at the woman sitting on the other side of the room whose hands were shaking so badly she had to press them flat against her thighs to make them stop. Clara didn't cry. That was the part nobody expected. She sat there in the gray dress she'd worn to their third anniversary dinner, the one he'd once said made her look like a painting. And she watched him sign away 5 years of her life in 11 seconds. Victoria collected the papers, tucked them into a folder, and said, "This is the right thing." Clara stood up and walked out. Ethan never once turned around to watch her go, said, "If you've stayed with this story this far, don't leave now. Subscribe to this channel and follow Clara and Ethan's story all the way to the end, because what happens next will shock you in ways you didn't see coming. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and tell me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. Now, let's get into it. The rain started somewhere around 3 in the afternoon, the kind that comes without warning in late October, cold and sideways and mean, the type that soaks through a jacket in 30 seconds and makes everyone on the street walk faster with their chins tucked down. Ethan Calloway was already in a bad mood before the rain hit. He'd spent the morning in a meeting where nothing was decided, an hour on the phone with a contractor who kept saying, "We're working on it," like those 4 words were a complete sentence, and now he was walking back to his car 2 blocks from the office because his driver had texted that the parking garage exit was blocked. He had his phone to his ear. His assistant was talking about a rescheduled dinner. I wasn't fully listening. That's why he almost missed her. The child came out of nowhere, or that's how it felt. The way it always feels when something small and fast moves into your peripheral vision at the exact wrong moment. She was maybe 4, maybe 5, in a yellow raincoat that was 2 sizes too big, the hood fallen back, her dark hair plastered flat against her forehead. She was running, not the running of a child playing, but the running of a child who had lost someone and was panicking, the kind of blind forward motion that doesn't account for streets or crosswalks or the fact that the light had just changed. Ethan moved before his brain caught up. He dropped his phone, heard it crack against the wet pavement, and stepped off the curb in 3 long strides and grabbed the girl by the back of her raincoat, just as a delivery truck came through the intersection hard, its horn blaring, the driver probably never even seeing her. The wind from it swept past them both. Ethan pulled her back against the curb, and they stumbled together onto the sidewalk, both of them going down to one knee on the wet concrete. The girl was shaking. Not crying yet, just shaking, her small hands gripping the front of his jacket like she needed something solid. He got down lower, to her level. Hey, look at me. You okay?" She looked up. He didn't know why his chest did what it did in that moment. He couldn't have explained it. She had dark eyes, not just dark brown, but the specific shade of near black that his own mother used to call ink eyes when he was small, the kind that seemed too deep for a child's face. And there was something along her left eyebrow, a thin pale scar, maybe 2 centimeters long, the kind of mark that comes from a fall or a sharp edge caught at exactly the wrong angle. Ethan had a scar in the same place. He'd had it since he was 6 years old, when he fell off a fence chasing a neighbor's dog. He told himself he was imagining it, coincidence. He just nearly watched a child get hit by a truck. His heart was hammering, his brain was doing strange things. The girl blinked at him through the rain. Then she said, very quietly, almost like she wasn't sure, "Daddy?" He stopped breathing. "Daddy, you came." She said it the way children say the thing they've been hoping for long enough that saying it out loud is almost scary. Not with certainty, but with that particular fragile hope that is worse than certainty, because it has already survived so many disappointments. Her lower lip was trembling. Her eyes were searching his face. Ethan sat back on his heels in the rain on the sidewalk and could not find a single word. "Lily," the voice came from behind him. He heard the footsteps first, fast and uneven, someone who'd been running. He turned. The woman stopped when she saw him. Her face did something complicated. He watched it happen, watched the relief of finding the child collapse into something else entirely. Something that looked like she'd just stepped on a nail in the dark. A sharp, involuntary flinch of pain that she controlled in about half a second and locked back down behind an expression he couldn't read. He knew that face. He'd known it for 5 years and then spent another 5 trying to forget it. Clara Whitmore. She looked different. That was the first stupid thought he had. She looks different. She was thinner than he remembered. Not in the way of someone who diets, but in the way of someone who works hard and doesn't always sit down to eat. Her hair was shorter, cut just below her jaw, and it was wet now, no umbrella, her coat soaked through at the shoulders. She had lines at the corners of her eyes that hadn't been there before. She looked like a woman who had lived 5 years that he hadn't seen. "Lily," she said again, and her voice was steady. Impressively steady, Ethan thought, for someone who looked like she'd just run 2 blocks in the rain and was now standing in front of a person she'd probably hoped to never see again. She came forward and crouched down and put both hands on the girl's face, checking, the automatic inventory a mother runs when her child has been frightened. "Baby, I told you to wait by the bookstore. What happened? I turned around for 10 seconds. I saw a dog," Lily said. "A big brown dog, Mama, and it went in the street and I wanted to make sure you could have been—" Clara stopped herself. She pulled the girl in and held her for a moment, just held her, eyes closed, one hand pressed flat against the back of Lily's yellow hood. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then she straightened up and looked at Ethan. "Thank you," she said. Flat, polite, the way you thank a stranger. He stood up. His knee was wet from the sidewalk and his cracked phone was still lying somewhere behind him, but he wasn't thinking about any of that. He was looking at the child, who was looking back at him with those ink-dark eyes and the scar above her eyebrow. "Clara, we're fine," she said. She took Lily's hand. "We need to get inside. It was good of you to—" "How old is she?" Something moved across Clara's face. It was quick, but he caught it. He'd always been good at reading her, back when he'd bothered to try. "Ethan." She said his name like a warning. "Clara, how old is she?" Lily looked up at her mother, then back at him. "I'm 4.5, she said helpfully. "Almost 5. My birthday is in February. Are you really my—" "We need to go." Clara's voice came out harder than she probably intended. She looked down at Lily. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's find somewhere dry." "But, Mama, that man has the same—" "Lily." The girl went quiet. She had the look of a child who knew when her mother's voice had moved past conversation into something she shouldn't push against. But she glanced back at Ethan over her shoulder as Clara turned her toward the sidewalk, and her expression was one he would spend a long time trying to describe and never quite manage. Like recognition. Like someone seeing a face they'd only ever seen in a photograph before, and trying to reconcile the flat image with the three-dimensional person. "Clara." He said it louder this time. She stopped walking but didn't turn around. "She called me Daddy." "Children say things," Clara said, still with her back to him. "She doesn't know you. She's never met you." "She has my eyes. Lots of people have dark eyes. She has my scar." The silence that followed that was different from the silence before it. The rain kept coming. A taxi moved through the street behind them. Someone ran past under an umbrella, and Clara stood very still with her daughter's hand in hers, and the stillness of her told him everything she wasn't saying. He walked around to face her. She let him. She didn't look away. She was doing something with her jaw, a small muscle working, the way she used to look when she was holding something in that she hadn't decided whether to let out yet. Her eyes were dry. They'd been dry the whole time. "Come inside somewhere," he said. "Somewhere dry. Let me buy Lily something hot to drink. She's soaked and she's shaking. We're not your responsibility." "I know that." He said it steadily. "But she's cold and she's scared, and I'm asking you to come inside for 20 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at Lily, who was watching both adults with the focused attention of a child who doesn't fully understand what's happening but knows it's important. 20 minutes, Clara said. They found a diner 2 doors down, the old-fashioned kind with vinyl booths and laminated menus, the kind that keeps the heat cranked up in October like they're daring winter to try something. The woman at the counter gave Lily a look that wasn't quite sympathy but was close to it. Small, soaking wet child that tends to move people. and brought a stack of paper napkins without being asked. Lily ordered hot chocolate with extra marshmallows without a trace of shyness. Clara ordered coffee and didn't touch it. Ethan ordered nothing. They sat in the booth for a while without talking. Lily arranged her marshmallows by size. Clara turned her coffee cup in a slow circle on the table. Ethan watched both of them and tried to organize something in his head that refused to be organized. "You're in the city," he finally said. "I moved back 8 months ago." She didn't explain why. "I work at Harmon Design, project manager." "I didn't know. You weren't supposed to." He absorbed that. "How long have you been? Where were you before?" "Portland." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I went there when I left. A friend had a spare room. I stayed. For 4.5 years. Almost 5. He looked at Lily, who had stopped arranging marshmallows and was now watching him with that same careful, unblinking attention. She had a small chocolate mustache. "Can I ask you something?" Lily said. Clara said, "Lily." "What's your name?" Lily finished. Ethan looked at Clara. Clara looked at the table. "My name is Ethan," he said. Lily nodded slowly, processing this. "I have a picture book, and one of the characters is named Ethan. He's a bear. He has a red scarf." She tilted her head slightly. "Your scar is in the same place as mine." "I know. Mama said I got mine from falling off the back step when I was 2. Did you fall too?" "Off a fence," he said, "when I was 6. She considered this. "That's a lot of falling." He almost laughed. It came out strange. Clara made a small sound into her coffee cup that might have been the same. "Lily," Clara said carefully, "can you do something for me? Can you go pick a song on that jukebox over there? I'll give you some quarters." Lily's eyes lit up. "Do they have Taylor Swift?" "I have no idea. Go find out." She scrambled out of the booth, and Ethan watched her go. Watched the yellow raincoat, slightly too big, the way she moved, the particular gravity of her walk, which was somehow both cautious and completely fearless. And when he turned back, Clara was already looking at him. "I want you to be careful," she said, "about whatever it is you're thinking." "What do you think I'm thinking?" "I think you're doing math." Her voice was quiet, but there was something under it, worn down and careful. "I think you're counting months backward, and you're landing somewhere that's scaring you, and I need you to understand that whatever you're landing on doesn't change the last 5 years." Clara, I raised her alone. She said it without heat, which was somehow harder to take than if she'd said it with anger. I raised her alone in a city where I didn't know anyone, on a salary that didn't cover everything, with no one to call at 3 in the morning when she had a fever of 103. I figured out how to be a parent by myself. And she's fine. She's more than fine. She is kind, and she is curious, and she is brave in the way that 4-year-olds are brave, completely without armor, and I will not have anything undo that. He let her finish. "I'm not trying to undo anything," he said. "You don't know what you're trying to do yet. You just grabbed her off a curb, and she looked at you with those eyes. And now you're sitting in a booth doing math and feeling things you weren't expecting to feel. I know that." She looked at him directly. "I've been here before, Ethan. I stood in front of you and asked you to listen to me. You didn't." The jukebox in the corner made a clunking sound and then started playing something that was definitely not Taylor Swift. Something old, something with a piano. Lily could be heard announcing, "That's not it," to no one in particular. "She's mine," Ethan said, quietly. Clara didn't answer. "Clara, I haven't said that." "You haven't denied it either." She looked down at her coffee. The muscle in her jaw was working again. "This isn't a conversation for a diner," she finally said. "Then tell me where and when, and I'll be there." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm not asking to... I don't know what I'm asking. I just need you to look at me and tell me the truth. That's all." Clara looked up. Her eyes were still dry. She had the expression of someone who made a decision a long time ago and has been carrying it so long. It stopped feeling like a decision and started feeling like weight. "Not here," she said, "and not today." He nodded. He would take that. For now, that would have to be enough. Lily came back with a report that the jukebox had Frank Sinatra and some old stuff, and approximately nothing she recognized, delivered with the solemnity of someone completing an important mission. She climbed back into the booth and retrieved her hot chocolate and looked at Ethan over the rim of the mug with those steady, serious eyes. "Do you live in the city?" she asked. "I do," he said. "We live in the city now too," she said. "Mama says it's an adventure." She paused. "I think adventures are mostly just things that are hard, but you do them anyway." Ethan looked at Clara. Clara was looking at her daughter with an expression that was private and complicated, the kind of look that belongs to people who have been through things together that they can't explain to anyone else. "That's pretty much exactly what an adventure is," Ethan said. Lily seemed satisfied with that. She went back to her hot chocolate. The rain kept coming against the diner windows, and the old jukebox played something slow and full of brass, and the three of them sat in the warmth of that ordinary booth in that ordinary diner while the world outside kept moving, indifferent, not knowing or caring that something had just cracked open in a way that nothing would ever quite close again. Ethan sat in his car for 40 minutes after they left. He didn't start the engine. He just sat there with his cracked phone in one hand and the rain against the windshield and the image of a small girl in a yellow coat turning back to look at him over her shoulder. And he thought about all the things he didn't know and all the things he was beginning to be afraid he did. His own eyes. His own scar. 4.5 years old. He did the math again. He'd been doing it since the booth, running it against the timeline of his marriage, the divorce, the dates he tried not to think about too carefully. The numbers kept landing in the same place. He thought about the day he signed the papers, the way Clara hadn't cried, the way she'd pressed her hands flat against her thighs to stop them from shaking. He told himself at the time that her composure meant something, that it meant she wasn't as devastated as she claimed, that it meant the marriage had meant less to her than she said. He'd used her steadiness against her in his own head, the way people do when they've already decided to leave and need reasons that hold up. He thought about his mother handing him the pen. He thought about the child's voice, thin and certain in the rain. "Daddy, you came." 4.5 years old, he opened his contacts, found a name he hadn't called in a long time, his college roommate, a man who now worked in private investigation and had done a job for him once, several years ago, on an entirely different matter. He stared at the name for a while. Then he put his phone in his pocket and drove home in the rain, and told himself he was going to sleep, and lay awake until 4 in the morning thinking about a little girl who arranged marshmallows by size, and thought adventures were things that were hard but you did them anyway. He was at his desk by 6. By 6:15 he'd pulled everything he still had from the year of their divorce. The documents his lawyers had filed, the report his mother had presented to him, the evidence that had convinced him Clara had done what they said she did. He hadn't looked at any of it in years. He'd put it in a folder and put the folder somewhere he wouldn't have to see it, because looking at it made him feel things he'd decided not to feel. He spread it out now. Claude's response was interrupted. Teep read through it slowly, the way you read something you've already made a decision about and are now trying to decide if the decision was right. The medical report was there, the one that had been presented to him as proof. He remembered the day Marcus had brought it to him, the careful way Marcus had set it on the desk, the expression on his face that Ethan had read as reluctant, as the look of a friend delivering news he didn't want to deliver. He'd trusted that look. He'd trusted Marcus for 12 years at that point, and trust that old is hard to question because questioning it means questioning yourself, means admitting that you handed something important to someone who didn't deserve it. He looked at the letterhead on the medical report. He'd never actually verified it. He realized that now, sitting at his desk at 6 in the morning with the rain still going outside the window. He'd looked at it, he'd felt the bottom drop out of his stomach, and he'd believed it, because the alternative, that someone he trusted would fabricate something like this, felt so far outside the boundary of what people actually did that his brain hadn't gone there. He pulled his laptop toward him and typed in the clinic name from the letterhead. The search came back in 4 seconds. The clinic didn't exist. He sat very still. He typed it again, more carefully. Same result. He tried variations of the name, checked the address listed on the document against a map search. The address was a dry cleaner in a neighborhood on the east side of the city. It had been a dry cleaner, according to the earliest records he could find, for at least 15 years. He closed the laptop. He sat there in the early morning quiet of his home office with the sound of rain and the sound of his own breathing and a feeling that was not quite any emotion he had a name for. Not anger yet. Not grief yet, something that lived underneath both of those things, in the cold basement where the foundations of things are built and broken. He thought about his mother's voice the morning she'd told him, the steadiness of it. The way she'd said, "I'm sorry, Ethan, but you needed to know," with the practiced gravity of someone delivering a verdict they'd rehearsed. He thought about how he had not once, in the weeks that followed, gone to Clara directly and asked her to explain. He had seen the report, he had believed his mother, and he had called his lawyer, in that order, without a conversation. He thought about Clara sitting in the divorce proceedings in the gray dress with her hands pressed flat on her thighs. He thought about her words in the diner. "I stood in front of you and asked you to listen to me. You didn't." He hadn't. He'd been so certain that listening was unnecessary, that the evidence was conclusive, that his pain was sufficient justification, that a man in his position did not have to sit across from the woman who'd supposedly humiliated him and hear her out. He'd believed his own anger more completely than he'd believed anything in his life, and that belief had felt at the time like strength. He understood now, sitting in the gray light of that October morning, that it had been the most catastrophic mistake he'd ever made, and that the catastrophe did not belong to fate or circumstance. It belonged to him. He picked up his phone and called Marcus Vale. It rang 6 times before Marcus picked up, his voice thick with sleep. "Ethan? It's 6 in the morning. I know what time it is." A pause. "Everything okay?" "No." Ethan kept his voice level. He was very practiced at level. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly." Another pause, longer this time. He could hear the quality of it change. "Ethan, the report, the medical report you brought me 5 years ago." Silence. "Marcus, this isn't—" Marcus stopped. Started again. "This is a conversation we should have in person. Answer the question. Ethan, there are things you don't— Was it real?" The silence that followed was its own answer, and they both knew it. And Marcus apparently knew there was no point in extending it, because after several seconds he let out a long, unsteady breath and said, very quietly, "No." Ethan didn't say anything. "It wasn't real," Marcus said again, and now his voice had a quality Ethan hadn't heard from him before. Something stripped down, something that had been waiting to be said for a long time and was exhausted from the waiting. "I'm sorry. There's not a way to say that means anything. I know that. But I need you to know that I have been living with what I did for 5 years, and it has not been— Did my mother put you up to it?" It wasn't a question. Ethan already knew the answer. He needed to hear Marcus say it. Marcus said, "Yes." "What did she offer you?" A long pause. "The Meridian contract." Marcus's voice was barely audible now. "My company was underwater. I needed that contract to survive. She said she would make sure I got it if I helped her with— She called it a corrective measure. She said Clara wasn't right for you. She said she was protecting you." "She was protecting the Calloway name," Ethan said. "That's what she's always protecting. Don't confuse the two." He stood up from his desk and walked to the window. The rain was lighter now, the sky beginning to move toward a pale gray that might eventually become morning. "What did you do, specifically? I want to know what was done." The report was fabricated. A man Victoria knew. She had a contact. Someone who could produce convincing documentation. He put it together, and then Marcus stopped. "Clara tried to call you after you filed, multiple times. Her calls were forwarded to a number that recorded and discarded them. And there were letters. She sent letters to your office. Victoria had someone on your mail staff intercept them." Ethan pressed his hand flat against the cold window glass. "She was pregnant when she left," he said. "I didn't know that," Marcus said quickly. "I want you to know I didn't. When I found out, it was months later, and by then you had the contract." Marcus didn't answer. There was nothing to answer. "I'm going to need everything," Ethan said. "Documentation of what you know. Emails, records, anything you still have. I want it sent to my private address by the end of the week." "Ethan, if this goes public—" "Marcus." He said it the way you say something when there are no more negotiations to be had. "Send it." He ended the call and stood at the window for a long time. There was a 5-year-old girl somewhere in this city who had his eyes and his scar, and who had looked at him in the rain and said, "Daddy, you came with a kind of hope that was not the product of certainty, but of imagination, of a child who had built a father out of absence and photographs she may or may not have been shown, out of the particular empty space in her life that children who grow up without one parent learn to navigate around with a skill that breaks your heart if you look at it directly. And there was a woman who had tried to call him and been silenced, who had written letters he never received, who had pressed her hands flat on her thighs in a gray dress and not cried, and who had moved to Portland and figured out how to be a parent alone for 4.5 years, and who had come back to this city 8 months ago for reasons she hadn't explained, and who yesterday had said to him, "I haven't said that. You haven't denied it either." He thought about his mother. He thought about the pen sliding across the marble desk with that practiced, certain hand. Victoria Calloway had built her family's reputation the way she built everything, with precision, with ruthlessness, and with the absolute conviction that what she was doing was correct. She had never once, in Ethan's memory, expressed doubt about a decision she made. She moved through the world like someone who had preemptively decided that the ends justified the means and closed the file on that question decades ago so that she never had to open it again. She had taken his marriage apart and handed him the pieces and said, "This is what truth looks like." And he had believed her because she was his mother, and because he was angry, and because a man who is angry enough will believe almost anything that confirms his anger. He had done that. He had chosen that. No one had forced his hand. He picked up the pen on his desk and held it for a moment, thinking about a different pen, a different desk, 11 seconds. Then he put it down and went to get dressed. He waited 3 days before contacting Clara. He waited because he needed to be certain, not of the facts, which Marcus's documentation when it arrived confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt, but of himself. He had learned something about himself in the last 72 hours that was not comfortable to sit with, that he was capable of catastrophic failure, not through malice, but through what might have been worse, through pride, through the lazy arrogance of a man who had never really been required to question his own instincts because his instincts had generally served him well enough. That kind of failure doesn't have a clean shape. It doesn't feel like villainy. It feels like a series of entirely justifiable decisions that turn out, in retrospect, to have been something else entirely. He spent those 3 days going over the documentation Marcus sent, and then he spent an afternoon with a private investigator who confirmed independently what Marcus had told him, and then he sat alone in his apartment for a long evening doing something he was not very practiced at, which was sitting with the full weight of what he had done without trying to mitigate it, without cataloging the ways his circumstances had contributed, without measuring his culpability against his mother's or Marcus's, just sitting with it, the full, unmitigated weight of it. It was not a pleasant evening. On the 4th day, he called Clara's office number. He'd found the Harmon Design website, seen her name in the project management directory, and asked the receptionist to leave a message asking if Ms. Whitmore would be willing to meet him for coffee. Professional, neutral, no pressure. She called back 6 hours later. "You found me fast," she said when he answered. "I wasn't trying to be subtle about it." "No, you never were." She was quiet for a moment. "What do you want, Ethan?" "I want to talk to you. Not about Lily. Not yet. I know that's not a conversation for a coffee shop, and I'm not trying to force anything. I just need to talk to you about what happened, about what I found out." Another silence. He'd become familiar with Clara's silences in the past few days, the way they were never empty, the way she was always doing something inside them. "What did you find out?" she said. Not a question. More like someone watching to see if you walk through a door you claimed you'd walk through. "I know about the report. I know it was fabricated. I know about the letters." He kept his voice steady. "And I know about Marcus." The silence that followed this was different from the others. It was the silence of someone who has been holding something at arm's length for a very long time and is trying to decide if they have the strength to keep holding it. "How long have you known?" she asked. 4 days. 4 days. She repeated it slowly. Then, "I tried to tell you, Ethan. I stood in your office and I told you the report wasn't real, and you had security walk me out of the building." He remembered that. He'd tried not to remember it in the years since, but it was in there, behind other things, the way memories you're ashamed of always are. "I know," he said. "You didn't even look at me." Her voice was still steady, still controlled, but there was a texture under it now. Something rough and worn, like fabric that's been washed too many times. "You sat behind your desk and you pressed a button, and 2 men in uniforms came and held the door, and you didn't look at me while they walked me out. I was 8 weeks pregnant. I didn't tell you that. I thought if I told you it would look like I was—" She stopped. "It doesn't matter. It matters. It matters now," she said. "It didn't matter then. That's the thing, Ethan. Things matter at the moment they're happening, and that's the only time you can do anything about them. 5 years later is a different situation entirely. I know that. So I need you to tell me what you're actually asking for. Because if you're asking to meet me for coffee so you can apologize and feel better about what you did, I can't help you with that. I have a daughter to raise and a job, and I don't have the bandwidth for your process. It was the most she'd said to him in one stretch, and it landed the way direct things do when you're not used to them, clean and precise and requiring no interpretation. I'm not asking you to help me feel better, he said. I don't expect to feel better about this. I'm asking you to let me sit across from you and tell you what I know and hear what you want to say. That's it. What you do with anything after that is completely yours. The silence this time was the longest. Saturday morning, Clara said finally. There's a place on Willard Street, Mira's. 9 o'clock. I won't bring Lily. Okay. And Ethan. Her voice shifted slightly, dropped half a register into something that was not quite anger and not quite warning, but lived somewhere between both. Don't come with speeches prepared. I've heard your speeches. I need something different this time. He said he understood. She hung up. He looked at the phone in his hand for a moment, then set it on the desk, outside his window. The city moved through its afternoon with complete indifference, and he sat in his office thinking about Saturday, about a small restaurant on Willard Street, about what it meant to come to a conversation without a speech prepared. He didn't know what that version of himself looked like. He was going to have to find out. Outside, the last of the October rain had finally stopped, and the city was that particular shade of washed clean gray that comes after 3 days of water, everything sharp-edged and cold and new, the kind of light that doesn't hide anything. He thought it was appropriate. Mira's on Willard Street was the kind of place that had been there long enough to stop trying to impress anyone. The booths were dark wood, worn smooth at the edges. The coffee came in heavy ceramic mugs that had been through 1,000 dishwasher cycles and showed it. On Saturday mornings, it filled up with the kind of quiet that isn't really quiet. Low conversations, the scrape of a chair, someone's newspaper, the particular domestic hum of a neighborhood place where the regulars don't need to look at the menu. Ethan arrived at 8:52. He took a booth near the back, away from the window, and ordered coffee and didn't touch it. Clara walked in at 9:01. She was in a dark green jacket he didn't recognize, hair tucked behind one ear, no makeup that he could see, or maybe just very little. She spotted him immediately and came straight to the booth without hesitating, the way someone moves when they've already decided not to let themselves hesitate. She sat down across from him and pulled off her jacket and draped it over the seat beside her and looked at him with the particular directness she'd always had, the kind that used to make him feel seen and now made him feel accurately measured. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said. "I didn't." She nodded like that was the correct answer. The waitress came and she ordered coffee and a water and then folded her hands on the table and waited. He had told himself he wasn't going to prepare a speech. He hadn't entirely succeeded. There were things arranged in his head, ordered, the way he ordered everything. And sitting across from her now, he understood what she'd meant when she said she didn't want that. Because what he'd prepared was a presentation of facts. And what this moment required was something he was considerably less practiced at. "I had Marcus's documentation verified independently," he said. "Everything he told me checks out. The clinic on the report doesn't exist. The address is a dry cleaner. The doctor's name on the letterhead has never held a medical license in this state or any adjacent one." He stopped, started again. "My mother arranged all of it. Marcus confirmed she approached him, what she offered him, what he did in exchange. The call forwarding, the letters. It was coordinated. It wasn't something that happened to us. It was something that was done to us deliberately." Clara listened to all of this without moving. Her coffee arrived and she wrapped her hands around it and kept watching him. "I know," she said. He stopped. "You knew?" "Not all of it. Not the details. I didn't know about Marcus specifically, not until just now." Her voice was measured, careful in the way of someone who has thought about this conversation in the abstract for a long time and is now navigating the real version, which is always different. "But I knew the report was fabricated because I know what my own medical history is. I knew Victoria was involved because she told me." He went very still. "She told you?" 3 weeks after you filed." Clara looked at her coffee. "She came to my apartment. She didn't call ahead. She just knocked on the door at 8 in the morning, And when I opened it, she walked in and sat down and told me, very calmly, that she had made certain arrangements to ensure the marriage ended, and that if I attempted to contest the divorce or make any claim against the Calloway name, she had additional documentation prepared that would be considerably more damaging to my professional reputation. She paused. She called it a mutual agreement to close the chapter cleanly. Ethan said nothing. I was 11 weeks pregnant at that point, Clara said. I hadn't told anyone yet except my doctor. I was still deciding how to... She stopped, pressed her lips together. Victoria knew. I don't know how she knew. She may have had someone watching me, I genuinely don't know. But she sat in my apartment and she looked at me and she said that Calloway resources were considerable and that if I tried to pursue any legal path, it would take years and cost everything I had, and that at the end of it, I would have nothing except a reputation that she had spent those years systematically dismantling. Clara looked up at him now. And then she said that some situations resolve best when everyone walks away quietly. That was the phrase she used, walks away quietly. Ethan was very still. And you did, he said. Not accusatory, just the fact of it. I was 29 years old and alone and 11 weeks pregnant, and I had $3,200 in my checking account. She said it without apology and without self-pity, just the plain arithmetic of a situation. I was not in a position to go to war with Victoria Calloway. So yes, I walked away quietly. I went to Portland and I had my daughter and I raised her and I didn't contact you because I had been told in very specific terms what would happen if I did, and I believed her because everything she had already done told me she meant it. The restaurant moved around them, indifferent. Someone laughed at the counter. A child at another table knocked over a glass of orange juice, the everyday machinery of a Saturday morning. Ethan sat inside all of it and felt something working its way through him that he didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't just anger. Anger would have been simpler. Why did you come back? He asked. 8 months ago. Why here? Clara was quiet for a moment. Lily started asking about her father. He absorbed that. She wasn't distressed about it. She wasn't acting out. It wasn't a crisis situation. She's 4. She was just starting to notice that other kids had 2 parents, and she had one, and she started asking questions I didn't have good answers to. I told her that her father lived far away and that things were complicated, which is true in its way. A corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, more like an acknowledgement of irony. She accepted that for a while. Children accept things when they're very young. And then one day she asked me what complicated meant, and I realized I was going to have to come up with something better eventually, and I thought... She stopped. You thought what? I thought I'd rather have that conversation here than in Portland. At least here she could potentially someday. I didn't have a plan, Ethan. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't coming back to find you. I came back because this is where I grew up, and it's where my work connections are, and because Lily was going to start school next year and I wanted her somewhere I knew. That's the whole of it. He believed her. He believed her because the version he might have imagined, Clara returning with a plan, with strategy, didn't match the woman sitting across from him, who had just described 5 years of surviving, not strategizing. I want to ask you something, he said, and I need you to know before I ask it that you don't have to answer, and that whatever you answer doesn't change what I owe you, regardless. Clara looked at him steadily. Is Lily mine? She didn't answer immediately. She looked at her coffee for a moment, then back at him, and he watched something move through her expression. Not hesitation about the truth, he understood, but something about the weight of saying it out loud to him in this particular context. Yes, she said. He exhaled. He hadn't realized he was holding his breath. I've never told her that, Clara said. I've never shown her a photo of you or told her your name. I don't know how she... She paused. In the rain. When she called you, I don't know either, he said. Maybe she saw something, or didn't see it. Maybe she saw someone who looked the way she imagined. He shook his head slightly. She has my eyes. My scar. I know. Clara's voice was quiet. I've been looking at those things for 4.5 years. They sat with that for a moment. Clara. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, and tried to do the thing she'd asked him to do. To not perform this, to just say it plainly. I owe you an apology that I don't have adequate words for. Not for what my mother did or what Marcus did. I'm not letting myself off with that. I'm talking about what I did. I signed those papers without talking to you. When you came to my office, I had you escorted out without listening. I believed what I was told because it was easier to believe it than to stand in my own anger and ask whether I was wrong. He stopped. You were carrying my daughter when that happened. You were trying to tell me and I didn't let you. And I've been sitting with that for 4 days and I don't think there's a way to make it anything other than what it is. Clara didn't look away. She let him finish and then she sat there, and the silence was the kind that comes after something has been said that needed to be said and that no one is going to argue with. I know, she said eventually. I know you know. I can see that you know. She turned her coffee cup in a slow half circle. But knowing it now isn't the same as what it would have meant then. That's the thing about time. It doesn't run backward. You can know the truth and still have missed what the truth would have changed. I know that too. So, she looked at him directly. What do you want, Ethan? Not what you want to apologize for. What do you actually want from this conversation? It was the question he'd been asking himself for 4 days and hadn't answered cleanly to himself, let alone to her. He didn't reach for the organized version he might once have prepared. He just said what was actually there. I want to know my daughter. Clara was quiet. I'm not saying that like it's a demand, he said. I understand that Lily is yours. You built that. You did that alone. I didn't have any part in it. I'm not going to walk in and claim something I didn't earn. But she's 4 years old. There's still time ahead of her that I haven't missed yet. He paused. And I want to know how to earn the right to be part of it. If that's something you'd ever consider. Clara looked at the table for a long time. She cried once, Clara said, and her voice had shifted. Something lower, more unguarded than anything she'd said so far. She was 3. I'd taken her to a birthday party for one of the kids from her nursery school, and one of the other little girls had her father there, and he was carrying her on his shoulders, you know the way, with his hands around her ankles, and Lily watched them for a long time. The whole party. She didn't say anything. She didn't cry there. But in the car on the way home, she asked me why she didn't have a daddy who carried her like that. Clara stopped. Ethan waited. I told her that some families are different and that different doesn't mean less. Which is true. True, I believe that. But she cried anyway, the quiet kind, with her head turned toward the window so she thought I couldn't see. And I drove and I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say that would actually help. And I hated... She stopped again, pressed the back of her hand briefly against her mouth. I hated that I couldn't give her the thing she was crying about. Not because I thought she needed a father specifically, but because she was 3 years old and she wanted something, and it was something I had no control over and I couldn't fix it. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. She doesn't cry about it anymore, Clara said, straightening up, composing herself with the practiced efficiency of someone who does not have the luxury of staying undone. She's adjusted. Kids adjust. But she still watches. At playgrounds, at school pickups. She watches fathers. The weight of that sat between them like a physical object. I'm not asking you to make a decision today, Ethan said. I'm not asking you for anything today except to tell me it's not impossible. Clara looked at him for a long moment. He could see her measuring something. Not just him, he thought, but herself. What she could manage. What Lily could handle. What the cost of hope was versus the cost of continued absence. It's not impossible, she said finally. But Ethan, her voice was careful and serious. If you become part of her life, you stay. You don't get to decide later that it's complicated or that you weren't ready or that your life has moved in a different direction. Because she is 4 years old and she will attach to you like children attach, completely, without the protective distance adults keep. And if you walk away from her after that, I will not forgive you for it. Not ever. I know. I need to hear you say you understand what that actually means. It means she comes first. Whatever I feel, whatever my situation is, whatever happens between you and me, she comes first. I don't disappear when it gets difficult. Clara searched his face. He sat still and let her, because she had earned the right to look as long as she needed. Okay, she said, not warmly, not a resolution, just the word, meaning they would see. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone and set it on the table. I need to think about how to do this. She doesn't know your name, she doesn't know who you are, and I am not going to let the first conversation be something that confuses or upsets her. So I need some time to figure out how to introduce this in a way that makes sense for a 4-year-old. She paused. 2 weeks. Give me 2 weeks to figure out what to say to her, and then we'll try something small. A park, maybe. somewhere she feels comfortable. 2 weeks, he said. And Ethan. She picked up her phone and put it back in her bag and met his eyes one more time. Whatever you're going to do about Victoria, that's your business. I'm not asking you to do anything on my behalf, and I'm not interested in legal proceedings or settlements or any of that. What I want is for my daughter to grow up without the shadow of your family's drama over her head. So whatever you decide to do about your mother, I'd ask you to do it in a way that keeps Lily out of it. He nodded. Understood. She slid out of the booth and picked up her jacket. She didn't offer her hand, and she didn't say it was good to see him, because they both knew that would have been the wrong register for what this was. She just said, "I'll be in touch," and walked out, and he watched her go through the window, saw her on the sidewalk outside, pulling her jacket on, not looking back, moving with the particular purposeful stride of someone who has somewhere to be and has learned that moving forward is the only direction available. He sat in the booth for a while after she left. The coffee had gone cold. He drank it anyway. The drive to his mother's house took 40 minutes in light Saturday traffic, out to the suburb where Victoria Calloway had lived for 30 years, in a house that was too large for one person and that she maintained with the rigid, immaculate control she brought to everything she owned. The gate at the end of the driveway was open, which meant the housekeeper was there. He drove through without calling ahead. Victoria was in the sunroom when he came in. He could see her through the glass from the hallway, seated at the small table with her reading glasses on, working through what looked like correspondence. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, and her expression moved through a brief sequence he might not have caught if he hadn't been watching for it. Recognition, then something calculating, then the smooth, settled composure she had never once let him see behind. "Ethan," she set down her pen. "I didn't know you were coming." "I know." He came into the sunroom and stood rather than sitting. "I want to talk about Clara Whitmore." Victoria's expression didn't change visibly. That in itself was information. A person with a clear conscience responds to an unexpected name with surprise, with the slight recalibration of someone adjusting context. Victoria's face did nothing. "What about her?" she said. "I know what you did." He kept his voice even. The anger was there, yet it had been there since the conversation with Marcus, sitting in his chest like something with weight. But he decided before he came that he was not going to let it run this conversation. "I have documentation from Marcus, and I've had it verified independently. The fabricated report, the letters you had intercepted, the calls that were forwarded. I know about the threat you made to Clara when she was pregnant." Victoria took off her reading glasses and folded them with careful precision and set them on the table. "I protected you," she said. He had expected something. He hadn't been sure what, some version of denial maybe, or the more sophisticated move of partial admission wrapped in justification. He hadn't expected how quickly she would arrive at that sentence, or how completely she would mean it. "You protected the name," he said. "There's a difference. She wasn't right for you." Victoria's voice was measured, the voice she used when she'd made a decision and was explaining it to someone who might not immediately understand. "She came from nothing. She had no professional standing that wasn't borrowed from your connections, and she was pregnant with my daughter." His voice stayed even. "She was pregnant with my daughter, and you fabricated evidence of infidelity and threatened her while she was alone and 11 weeks along, and then you had someone intercept her attempts to reach me, and she spent 4.5 years raising that child alone while I didn't know she existed." Victoria held his gaze. "I didn't know she was pregnant." "Clara says you did." A very brief pause. "Clara's version of events may not be entirely—" "Don't." He said it quietly, but it landed and she stopped. "Don't do that in front of me. Not today." The sunroom was very still. Outside the windows, the garden was that flat late October brown, everything cut back and waiting, and the light through the glass was pale and without warmth. "I have a daughter," Ethan said. "Her name is Lily. She is 4 years old. She has my eyes and a scar above her left eyebrow that she got falling off a back step when she was 2, and she doesn't know who I am, and she has never in her life had a father." He paused. "I did not make that happen. You did. And I want you to understand that I know that, and that I am not going to make peace with it." Victoria looked at him for a long moment. He tried to find something in her face, regret, maybe, or the beginning of something that might eventually become it, and found only the careful, calibrated composure of a woman who had decided what she believed and was not going to be moved from it in a single conversation. "What are you going to do?" she said. "I'm going to get to know my daughter." He said it flatly. "And I'm going to be honest with my board about why the Meridian contract went to Vail Consulting, because Marcus's documentation makes it clear there was a conflict of interest I wasn't aware of, and my fiduciary duty requires disclosure. And then I'm going to figure out what it means to be a father to a child I've already missed 4 years of, and I'm going to do that without your input or your interference." He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd set it coming in. "I'd like you to think carefully about whether you want to have a relationship with your granddaughter. I won't make that decision for you, but I'm telling you now that Lily will know me, and eventually she will know the shape of what happened, because children grow up and they ask questions, and I am not going to lie to her. So if you want to be part of her life, you're going to need to figure out what that looks like from where you're actually standing." He left his mother sitting in the sunroom with her folded glasses on the table and her composure intact, and whatever was underneath it, whatever she let herself feel in private when no one was performing composure at, held in behind her face where it had always been. He didn't slam the door. There was no satisfaction in that. He just closed it behind him and walked back to his car and sat in the driveway for a moment. He thought about Lily at the jukebox, reporting gravely that there was Frank Sinatra and some old stuff. He thought about her arranging marshmallows by size. He thought about what Clara had said. She still watches, at playgrounds, at school pickups. She watches fathers. And the way she'd said it, not as an accusation but as a fact, the plainest and most devastating kind. He started the car and drove back toward the city. The 2 weeks Clara had asked for were going to be the longest 2 weeks he'd spent in recent memory, and he knew it. And he also knew that sitting with that discomfort was the appropriate punishment for a man who had spent 5 years not sitting with anything at all. He had made his living being decisive, being the person who moved situations forward by force of will and available resources. This was something different. This was a situation where the only available move was patience, and patience had never been a thing he was good at in any genuine way. He thought about Lily's voice in the rain, the particular pitch of it, the way the hope in it was threaded through with uncertainty, the way she'd said the word like she was testing whether it was real or just something she'd imagined. "Daddy, you came." He had come, technically. He had stopped a truck from hitting her on a wet street in October. That was the sum total of what he had done for his daughter in 4.5 years. He understood, with a clarity that was not comfortable and was not intended to be, that everything else would have to be built from there. The city came back around him as he crossed back into it. The Saturday traffic thickening, the streets full of people doing their ordinary Saturday things. And Ethan drove through it and thought about a park, somewhere Lily felt comfortable, and 2 weeks, and what it meant to show up for someone who had absolutely no obligation to trust you, and who had every reason in the world not to. He thought it might be the hardest thing he'd ever done. He thought he probably deserved that. The 2 weeks passed the way time passes when you are waiting for something that matters, unevenly, certain hours stretching out long and flat, and others collapsing without warning into the next. Ethan worked. He always worked. It was the one thing he'd never had trouble doing, the one place where the mechanisms of his mind ran clean and without friction. He sat through meetings and signed documents and made decisions and answered emails, and underneath all of it, like a second pulse, was the constant low-level awareness of a park he hadn't been to yet and a child who didn't know his name. Clara texted him on a Thursday, 12 days in. Saturday. Riverside Park, the one on Clement, 10 a.m. She knows she's meeting someone I used to know. That's all I've told her. He read it 3 times and typed back, "I'll be there." Then he put his phone face down on his desk and stared at his computer screen for 10 minutes without seeing anything on it. He arrived at the park at 9:45. He didn't intend to arrive that early. He'd left his apartment at what he calculated was the right time and then walked slowly and still arrived 15 minutes ahead of schedule, which told him something about his internal state that he didn't particularly want to examine. He found a bench near the entrance and sat on it and watched the park fill up with the ordinary population of a Saturday morning. A man throwing a tennis ball for a dog that brought it back once and then lost interest. 2 older women walking at a pace that suggested they did this every week and talked about the same things each time. A father pushing a stroller with the slightly glazed expression of someone who'd been up since 5. He watched the father with the stroller for a moment. The man was maybe 30, wearing a fleece that had something on the sleeve that was probably food, and he was scrolling his phone with one hand while pushing with the other, not paying particular attention to anything, just doing the ordinary, unglamorous labor of a Saturday morning with a small child. There was nothing remarkable about it. That was the thing that got Ethan, the total unremarkableness of it, the way the man was just there, present, not even fully conscious of the fact of his presence. He had just shown up. He had been showing up probably for however old the baby was, without thinking about it as something he was doing, because it was simply what you did. Ethan thought about 4.5 years of Saturday mornings he hadn't shown up for. He heard them before he saw them. Lily's voice first, carrying the way children's voices do, high and declarative, telling Clara something about a bird she'd spotted near the gate. He stood up from the bench without deciding to. They came through the entrance together, Clara with a canvas bag over one shoulder, and Lily in a red coat this time, not the yellow one, with her hair in 2 uneven pigtails that had the look of a 4-year-old who had insisted on helping with her own hair. She was talking about the bird. Clara was listening with the particular quality of attention mothers develop, genuinely present, but with one layer of awareness always running separately. And when she looked up and saw Ethan standing by the bench, that separate layer activated, and her expression did the thing it had done in the rain. The brief, complex movement quickly controlled. Lily saw him a second later and stopped talking mid-sentence. She looked at him. He looked at her. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. She turned to Clara. "Is that the person?" "That's him," Clara said. "His name is Ethan." Lily looked back at him with the focused, unself-conscious assessment of a child who has not yet learned to pretend she isn't looking directly at someone. She did this for several seconds without apparent discomfort. "You have a scar," she said finally. "So do you," he said. She touched the one above her eyebrow with 2 fingers, the habitual gesture of someone who's thought about a thing on their face. "Mine is from falling," she said. "Mama already told me." "Mine too." She seemed to find this adequately interesting. She looked at Clara again with a question in her face that she apparently decided not to ask out loud, and then she said to Ethan, "Do you want to look at the ducks? There's ducks by the water part." He said he did. They walked toward the pond, Lily slightly ahead with the authority of someone who knows the terrain, Clara beside Ethan, with a few inches of distance between them that had its own specific quality. Not hostile, not warm, just the careful space of 2 people navigating something without a map. He didn't try to fill it with conversation. He was watching Lily, the way she moved, the way she stopped suddenly when something caught her attention, and then just as suddenly moved on, the particular unpredictable rhythm of a small child in a space she felt safe in. She found the ducks. There were 5 of them clustered near the edge of the water, and Lily announced their probable names with the confidence of someone who had thought about this before. The large brown one was Gerald. The 2 smaller gray ones were sisters whose names were Biscuit and Margot. The other 2 she hadn't decided about yet. "That's a lot of decisions to make about ducks," Ethan said. "Someone has to," Lily said reasonably. Clara made a small sound beside him. He glanced at her, and she was looking at the ducks with an expression that was trying not to be a smile and not entirely succeeding. They stayed by the water for a while. Lily narrated. Ethan listened and asked questions that she answered with authority, and at some point she moved to stand closer to him. Not deliberately, or maybe deliberately in the way children are deliberate about things, the way they gravitate toward warmth without announcing they're doing it. She pointed out that Gerald was being rude to Biscuit, and he agreed that Gerald did seem to have some issues. She asked if he liked ducks in general, and he said he'd never thought about it much. She said that was okay. You could not know about ducks and still be a good person, which was a generous position. Clara watched this from a foot away, with her hands in her pockets, and said very little. After an hour, she said they needed to get going. Lily had a birthday party in the afternoon, and they needed time to wrap the present, which had apparently not yet been wrapped because someone had lost the tape. Lily said she knew where the tape was. Clara said she had said that yesterday, and the tape was still missing. Lily said the tape was in her shoe. Clara stopped walking and looked at her daughter. "Why is the tape in your shoe?" Lily looked thoughtful. "I was keeping it safe." Ethan laughed. It came out real, which surprised him. A real laugh, not the social kind, the kind that arrives before you've decided to produce it. Clara looked at him, and for just a moment her expression was unguarded in a way it hadn't been since the diner, something open and undefended. And then Lily had taken her hand and was pulling her toward the gate, and the moment closed. At the gate, Lily turned back to look at him. "Will you come back?" she asked. He looked at Clara. Clara gave the smallest nod. "Yeah," he said, "I'll come back." Lily nodded like this was the reasonable and expected answer. Then she and Clara went through the gate, and he stood and watched them go. And this time, he was the one watching someone leave. And the difference between that and the other version, the one where he had been the one walking away, settled into him with a weight that he thought he would be carrying for a long time. He came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. It didn't go smoothly, which was probably the only honest thing to say about it. The second Saturday, Lily was in a difficult mood. "Tired," Clara said quietly when they arrived. She'd had a rough night. And she didn't want to look at the ducks or play on the equipment, and eventually sat on a bench with her arms crossed and her jaw set and informed both of them that she didn't want to be at the park. Clara tried to engage her. Ethan tried to engage her. She remained comprehensively unengaged. After 10 minutes of this, Ethan sat down on the bench beside her. "What would you rather be doing?" he asked. "Sleeping," she said, with the flat precision of someone who has identified the exact correct answer to a question. "Okay," he said. "Fair." She looked at him sideways. "You're not going to say I should try to have fun?" "No." "Mama says that." "Yeah, but sometimes you just want to sleep." Lily considered this. "I'm not actually tired," she said after a moment. "I just don't want anyone to be cheerful at me." "Understood." They sat on the bench together in companionable silence for a few minutes, while Clara stood a few feet away, trying not to look like she was watching them. Then Lily said, without particular preamble, "Did you know my mama when she was little?" "No," he said. "I met her when we were grown up." "Were you friends?" He thought about how to answer that. "We were more than friends for a while," he said. "And then things got complicated, and we weren't." Lily turned this over. "Complicated like how I'm not allowed to have my tablet on school days complicated. Or complicated like when you and someone have a fight and you don't know how to fix it? More like the second one. Did you fix it?" "We're working on it," he said. Lily nodded slowly. "My friend Addie and I had a big fight about whose turn it was to be the queen, and we didn't talk for 3 days. And then we decided we could both be queens because there's no rule that says there can only be one." She paused. "Maybe you and Mama could both be something." He didn't have anything to say to that wasn't going to be too much for a 4-year-old in a tired mood on a park bench, so he just said, "That's a good idea," and meant it in more ways than she would understand. The third Saturday was easier. The fourth, Lily asked if he could push her on the swings, and he did, and she told him the specific height she needed to reach to feel like she was flying, which was really high, but not scary high. There's a difference. And he got her there on the third try, and she said, "That's it," with a conviction that made Clara laugh from the bench where she was watching. He noticed that Clara laughed differently than she used to. Or maybe he was noticing it for the first time. There was something in it that had a crack through it, like a mug that's been repaired. Still functional, still real, but you could see where it had broken if you looked. He thought he was responsible for at least some of those breaks, and the knowledge sat in him like a stone. It was on a Tuesday evening. 6 weeks after the park, the thing with the board disclosure had been handled. The legal machinery around Marcus was grinding through its slow process. That Ethan got the call from Clara. He was in his office when his phone rang. He picked up without checking the number and heard Clara's voice doing the thing it did when she was controlling it hard. That particular compression of tone that meant the thing she was actually feeling was considerably larger than what was coming out. "Lily's at St. Grayson's," she said. "The children's emergency. I need you to... I'm telling you because I thought you should know, not because I need... I'm leaving now," he said. "What happened?" "She had a seizure." Claire's voice compressed further. "At daycare. She's stable. They said she's stable, but they're running tests and they think it might be..." She stopped. "They think it might be something with her heart, a structural thing. They're doing an echo." He was already standing, already reaching for his jacket. "I'm 20 minutes away. I'm coming." "Ethan, you don't have to..." "I'm coming, Clara." She didn't argue. He took that as the thing it was. He made it in 17 minutes, which involved no good decisions about traffic lights. and found Clara in the waiting room of the pediatric emergency unit in the same green jacket she'd worn to Mira's, sitting forward with her elbows on her knees and her hands clasped in front of her mouth. She looked up when he came through the door and something moved across her face. Relief, he thought, and then the slight contraction of someone who wasn't sure they were entitled to feel relief at his arrival. "She's with the cardiologist," Clara said. "They won't let me in while they're doing the imaging." He sat down beside her. "What happened exactly?" "She was at afternoon activity time. Her teacher said she just went down. No warning, no crying, just down." Clara's hands tightened against each other. "She was out for maybe 40 seconds. By the time the ambulance got there, she was conscious. She was talking. She was asking for me." She stopped. Her jaw worked. "She was asking for me and I was in a meeting and my phone was—" Her voice cracked, just barely, and she pulled it back. "I had it on silent." "You got here," he said. "I got here 20 minutes later." She said it like a sentence she intended to keep carrying. "Clara, you got here." She didn't answer. She looked at the doors that separated the waiting room from wherever Lily was, the heavy institutional doors with the small wire-reinforced windows, and her eyes were doing the thing they did, staying dry through what clearly required effort. He didn't reach for her. He sat beside her and he stayed, and that was the whole of what he could offer, and he was aware it was not adequate and offered it anyway because it was what was available. They waited for an hour and 40 minutes, and brought one to Clara, and she held it without drinking it, which was what she'd done at Mira's, and he thought that might just be what Clara did with coffee when she was managing something difficult, held it like something warm to press her hands against. He called his assistant and cleared his morning. He didn't mention it to Clara. She would not have wanted him to make a point of it. A nurse came out at the 2-hour mark and told them the imaging was complete and the cardiologist would be in to discuss shortly, and that Lily was asking for her mama and also for the man with the scar, which made Clara look at Ethan with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Surprised, he thought, and something else, something more complicated. "She knows who you are," Clara said. It wasn't quite an accusation, more like someone processing a fact that had arrived ahead of schedule. "I know," he said. "Is that okay?" Clara looked at the doors. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. The cardiologist was a woman in her 40s named Dr. Priya Nair, efficient and direct in the way that good doctors in high-stakes departments tend to be, someone who had delivered difficult news enough times to know that clarity was kinder than softness. She brought them both into a small consultation room and explained what the echo had shown. Lily had a congenital heart defect, a structural irregularity that had apparently been present since birth, and had gone undetected because it had been compensated for well enough in her early years not to produce symptoms. "The seizure was a cardiac event," Dr. Nair said, "a brief arrhythmia triggered by physical exertion. The good news is that we caught it, and this type of defect is surgically correctable with a high success rate. The less good news is that she will need surgery, and she will need it in the next 4 to 6 weeks. Clara sat very still beside him. "What does the surgery involve?" Ethan said, because Clara looked like she needed a moment before she could form the question. Dr. Nair explained. It was open-heart surgery, a straightforward phrase for something that was not simple. She used terms that were both precise and accessible, clearly calibrated for a parent who needed to understand without being buried. The procedure itself was 2 to 3 hours. The recovery was 4 to 6 weeks with restrictions. The surgical team at St. Grayson's performed this procedure regularly. The outcomes data was strong. "Can I see her?" Clara asked. Her voice had come back, steadied. "Yes. I'll have someone take you back." They went in together. Ethan almost stopped at the door, almost said he'd wait, that this was a family moment, that he didn't want to intrude on something that was Clara's. But Clara had walked through the door without looking back to see if he was following, and he decided to take that as his answer. Lily was in a bed that was too big for her, which was the thing that hit him first. The disproportionate size of the bed, the way she looked small against it in a way she never looked in the park or the diner. She had monitors attached and an IV line in her left hand that she was examining with clinical interest. She looked up when they came in, and her face did the thing it had started doing when she saw him, a sort of brightening, unguarded, and immediate, that he had not yet found a way to look at without it doing something complicated to his chest. "I had an adventure," she announced. "I heard," Clara said. She went to the bed and sat on the edge of it and put her hand on Lily's face, the same inventory she'd run in the rain, checking, reassuring herself. "How do you feel?" "Weird," Lily said. "My arm itches where the thing is." She indicated the IV. Then she looked past Clara to Ethan, who was standing at the foot of the bed. "You came," was the same two words. The same two words she'd said in the rain, in the same voice, with the same quality of hope that had survived enough disappointment to be careful about itself. He did not look away from her. "I came," he said. "Mama called you?" "She did." Lily considered this, looking between the two of them with the focused attention she brought to things she was trying to understand. Then she said to Clara, "Is Ethan my dad?" The room was very quiet. Clara looked at her daughter for a long moment. He watched her face, watched her arrive at the decision, watched the thing that preceded it, which was not hesitation exactly, but the same quality he'd seen that first day in the rain, the look of someone setting down something they've been carrying a long distance. "Yes," Clara said. "He is." Lily looked at Ethan. He looked back at her. He did not trust himself to speak. "Okay," Lily said, with the matter-of-fact simplicity of someone who has just received confirmation of something they had already quietly decided was true. She looked back at the IV in her hand. "I thought so because of the scars." Clara made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cry, and landed somewhere in the territory between them, and she turned her face slightly so that Lily wouldn't see the full of it. Ethan saw it. He looked at the ceiling for a moment. "Does it hurt?" he asked Lily, meaning the IV. "No," she said. "It just itches, and it's boring here. There's no jukebox." "There might be a TV," he said. "Is there Frank Sinatra on it?" "Probably not." "That's okay," she said. "I didn't like Frank Sinatra anyway. Mama puts it on sometimes, and I fall asleep." She considered. "Maybe that's the point." Clara laughed again, this time cleanly. She wiped her face quickly with the back of her hand in the way of someone who had been holding things in long enough that the smallest release ran further than intended. Ethan pulled a chair to the side of the bed and sat in it. He didn't ask if that was okay. He just sat down, and neither Clara nor Lily told him to move, and the three of them stayed in that too-large room, in that too-large bed, with the monitors beeping their steady rhythm. And Lily talked about the ambulance ride and the interesting things she had observed, and the fact that one of the paramedics had a tattoo of a lobster, which she felt was a bold choice. And Clara listened, and Ethan listened, and the afternoon moved slowly toward evening outside the window. At some point, Lily fell asleep mid-sentence, the way young children do, completely and without negotiation, one moment present and the next simply gone. Clara reached over and pulled the thin blanket up and sat looking at her for a moment with an expression that Ethan felt was private enough that he looked away. They sat in the quiet of Lily's room for a while, just the two of them with the sound of the monitors. "She's going to be okay," Clara said eventually. Not to him exactly, more to the room. "She is," he said. And then, because he meant it, and because she deserved to hear it without it being about him, "You've done an extraordinary thing with her, Clara, the person she is, that came from you." Clara looked at her hands in her lap. "She came from both of us," she said quietly. "The stubbornness is definitely yours." He almost smiled. "The duck naming is yours." "I don't name ducks." "You name everything. You name the street cats outside our old apartment. You named the plant in your office that died." She looked up at him, surprised. Surprised, he thought, that he remembered that. He remembered a lot more than she probably thought. He'd spent 5 years telling himself he'd moved on, and discovering in the last 2 months what moving on had actually cost. "Gerald is a good duck name," Clara said. "It really is." She looked back at Lily. The brief lightness held for a moment and then settled back into something more serious, the weight of what the doctor had said moving back in. "She needs surgery," Clara said. "I know. I don't. Financially, I can cover some of it, but not." She stopped. Her jaw tightened. He could see her wrestling with this, the specific difficulty of someone who has managed everything alone and does not know how to ask for the thing they need. "I'll handle it," he said. Ethan, Clara." He said it steadily. "I have 5 years of nothing to account for. Let me do this." She looked at him for a long moment. He could see the argument in her, the independence that had kept her alive through things he hadn't been there for. the reasonable distrust of accepting things from people who had already let her down badly once. He didn't push. He just held the offer on the table and waited. "Okay," she said. The same word she'd said at Mira's, with the same quality. Not resolution, not forgiveness, just the door staying open. He nodded. Outside the window, the city was moving into early evening, the sky going that particular shade of blue-gray that comes just before the lights of the city take over from the light of the day. Lily slept in her hospital bed with the monitors keeping time, and Clara sat beside her and Ethan sat across from them both. And he was aware with a clarity that was not comfortable but was genuine that this was the first time in 5 years that he had been exactly where he was supposed to be. He also knew that being in the right place after 5 years of the wrong one didn't make you redeemed. It just meant you'd finally found the starting line. He stayed until 10 o'clock, when a night nurse came in to do observations and strongly implied that the number of people in the room should decrease. Clara walked him to the elevator. They stood in the corridor for a moment with the particular quietness of two people who have been through something together and haven't yet found the language for it. "Thank you," Clara said, "for coming tonight." "You don't have to thank me for that." "I know I don't have to." She met his eyes. "I'm doing it anyway." The elevator came. He got in. He looked back at her through the closing doors, standing in the hospital corridor in the green jacket, with her arms crossed against herself, not against him, just the posture of someone who has been holding things together through a long day and is almost at the end of their ability to make it look easy. He rode the elevator down alone and walked out into the night and stood on the sidewalk outside St. Grayson's for a moment in the cold air, thinking about a little girl who had looked at him in a hospital bed and said, "I thought so because of the scars," with the same simple certainty she brought to naming ducks and classifying adventures, as if the most complicated things in life were really just a matter of paying attention to what was already there. He pulled his phone out and called the best pediatric cardiac surgeon in the city, a man he'd met twice at fundraising events, and whose number was in his contacts for no reason he'd ever expected to actually use. It was 10:15 at night. He called anyway. The man picked up on the fourth ring. "I need to talk to you about a patient at St. Grayson's," Ethan said. "Her name is Lily. She's 4 years old." He stood on the sidewalk in the cold and talked, and the city moved around him, and in a room 6 floors above, his daughter slept with her monitors and her IV and her complete and uncomplicated certainty about who he was, and he understood that some things you don't earn before they're given to you, and that what you do with the gift afterward is the whole of the question. Dr. Ansel Bright was not the kind of surgeon who made promises. He said this himself early in the first meeting, sitting across from Ethan and Clara in a consultation room at St. Grayson's with Lily's imaging results on the screen behind him. He was 61, compact, with the unhurried quality of someone who had operated on enough small hearts to have stopped being afraid of the work itself and had redirected that energy entirely into precision. He looked at both of them and said, "I don't tell parents everything is going to be fine because I don't know that. What I can tell you is what I know about this defect, what I know about this procedure, and what my team's record looks like. You decide what to do with that information." Clara said she appreciated that. Ethan thought she meant it, that after 5 years of managing things alone, she had lost patience for people who softened the edges of reality in ways that made their own discomfort easier at her expense. Dr. Bright walked them through the procedure in detail. The defect was a small but significant gap in the wall between 2 chambers of Lily's heart, present since birth, compensated for through early childhood, and now beginning to cause the kind of electrical disruption that had produced the seizure. Left unaddressed, it would worsen. Corrected surgically, the long-term prognosis was excellent. The surgery itself carried risks, as all surgery did, which he listed without dramatics and without minimizing. Recovery would require 4 weeks of restricted activity, then a gradual return to normal. "She'll be running after ducks again by spring," he said, which was not the kind of thing Ethan expected from a man who'd just said he didn't make promises, and which made Clara's expression do something brief and unguarded. "She names them," Ethan said. "The ducks." Dr. Bright looked at him. "Smart kid." "She really is," Ethan said. They scheduled the surgery for 3 weeks out. That was the window. 3 weeks of Lily in the hospital for monitoring and pre-surgical preparation, with day visits allowed, with Clara essentially living in the family room down the hall from the pediatric cardiac ward. Ethan went every day. He did not announce this as a policy or a commitment. He just showed up, the way Clara had said was the only thing that mattered, and kept showing up. The first week was the hardest. Not because Lily was in bad shape, she was actually in reasonable spirits, having decided that the hospital was an interesting environment with a reliable snack schedule. But because 3 weeks is a long time when you are 4 years old, and the thing you want most is to go home, and the gap between what Lily wanted and what was possible produced a kind of low-grade misery that she managed with varying success depending on the day. Some days she was fine. Some days she was not fine at all, and the not fine days had a texture that was difficult to navigate because there was no fixing it, just sitting in it with her. On a Wednesday in the second week, Ethan arrived at 11 in the morning to find Clara in the family room down the hall, not in Lily's room. She was sitting in a vinyl chair with a hospital blanket around her shoulders and a cup of cold coffee on the table beside her, and the expression of someone who had been awake too long and was not going to admit it. She threw her lunch at the wall, Clara said when he sat down. Not with anger, with the flat exhaustion of someone reporting weather conditions. What was the lunch? Macaroni and cheese, that's a waste. It was not good macaroni and cheese. I think she was making a point. He looked at the cold coffee. How long have you been in here? 20 minutes. She told me she wanted some time. Clara rubbed her face with both hands. She's 4. She told me she needed space. I don't know where she learned that. She probably heard it somewhere and stored it for when it would be useful. Clara dropped her hands and looked at him. She does that. She collects things people say and brings them out later in entirely different contexts. A brief, tired, almost smile. She told her nurse yesterday that patience is just waiting with better posture. I have no idea where that came from. That's actually not bad advice. She's 4. But Clara said it with something warmer in it now, the way you say something that is technically a complaint, but is actually the thing that keeps you going. He went down to Lily's room. She was sitting in the middle of the bed with her arms crossed, the physical manifestation of a position she'd taken and was not yet ready to vacate. There was a trace of macaroni on the wall that someone had partially wiped down. He pulled the chair up and sat without saying anything for a moment. Lily looked at him sideways without uncrossing her arms. I'm not sorry, she said. Okay, he said. It wasn't good. Your mom mentioned. She's going to be sad that I threw it. Probably a little. Lily was quiet. Her jaw moved in the way that meant she was working on something. I just want to go home, she said. It came out smaller than her other sentences, without the armoring. I'm tired of it here, and I want my own bed, and I want my bear, and I want to go home. He didn't tell her it would be soon. It wasn't soon enough to say soon and have it mean anything. I know, he said. You can't fix it. No. She looked at him directly for the first time since he'd sat down. Can you stay for a while? I've got nowhere to be, he said. She uncrossed her arms. She didn't say anything else about the macaroni or going home. She picked up the book that was on the bed beside her, a thick picture book about a family of otters navigating a complicated river journey that apparently had many installments, and she handed it to him. We're on chapter 7, she said. The otters found a map, but nobody can read it because it's in otter language, and one of them pretends she can read it, but she's lying and it's causing problems. He took the book. Sounds like a difficult situation. It's very dramatic, Lily said. She settled back against her pillows. You do the voices. Mama does voices, but she does the same voice for all of them, and it's confusing. He opened to chapter 7 and looked at the illustration of 5 small otters clustered around an indecipherable map, and he gave them all different voices, and Lily corrected 2 of them and approved the others, and they sat in the hospital room for 2 hours reading about otters while the afternoon moved through the window, and the nurses came and went with their charts and their quiet efficiency. Clara appeared in the doorway at some point. He saw her in his peripheral vision, not coming in, just standing there for a moment listening. She was there for maybe 2 minutes, and then she was gone, and he didn't stop reading. The night before the surgery was the longest night. Clara didn't sleep. He knew this because he was in the family room at 7 in the morning when she came in from the direction of Lily's room, still in the clothes she'd been wearing the day before. She looked at him sitting in the vinyl chair with his own untouched coffee, and she said, You stayed. I went home for a few hours, he said, came back around 5. She sat down in the chair across from him. She's asleep, she said. Finally. Around 4. She picked up the coffee he'd gotten for her. He'd gotten 2, she hadn't known he was coming back, and held it. They're taking her down at 7:30. I know. Dr. Bright said 2 to 3 hours. I know. She looked at him. You don't have to stay for the surgery. I know. She held the coffee in both hands and looked at the middle distance between them. I keep thinking about what she asked me in the hospital room, Clara said, when she asked if you were her dad. I've been thinking about what I felt when she asked it. She paused. I wasn't surprised that she asked. I was surprised that the answer felt... She stopped. Felt what? He asked. Like a relief, she said quietly, like she was testing whether that was the right word. Like I'd been holding it at a distance for a long time, and when she asked, I just put it down. She looked at her coffee. I didn't expect it to feel like that. He didn't know what to say that wouldn't be too much or not enough, so he said, I'm glad she asked. Clara nodded slowly. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need to say it now, before she goes into surgery, because I don't want to be the person who doesn't say things when they should be said. Clara looked at him. I know I don't have any right to ask you for anything, he said. I know what I did. I know what 5 years cost you and what it cost her. And there isn't a version of this where the accounting works out in my favor, and I'm not trying to make it. But I want you to know that whatever happens, after the surgery, through the recovery, all of it, I'm not going anywhere. Not because I'm trying to earn something, not because it's the right performance. Because she's mine and you're... He stopped, corrected himself. Because she's mine, and I am not going to be the kind of father who shows up when it's convenient. Clara listened to all of this without interrupting. Okay, she said. That's it? What do you want me to say, Ethan? She said it without edge, just the question. I've been watching you show up for 2 months. I'm not going to give you a verdict based on 2 months, but I see it. She met his eyes. I see you trying. It was not forgiveness. It was something more provisional and more honest than forgiveness. And he understood that it was exactly what he'd earned and exactly what he deserved. At 7:15, they walked Lily down to the pre-surgical area together. She was in the hospital bed, small and alert, the too large gown with the pattern of cartoon fish that she had selected from the limited available options because fish are interesting. She was holding her bear, which Clara had retrieved from home in the first days of the hospital stay. A worn brown thing missing one eye, named Professor, for reasons Lily had explained once, and that both of them had only partially followed. Lily looked at both of them walking on either side of her bed and seemed to understand that this was a moment requiring her to be brave, and she appeared to be deciding what bravery looked like. Professor is scared, she told them. What does Professor need? Ethan asked. Lily considered. He needs someone to hold his hand during the waiting. I can do that, Clara said. He also wants someone to find out if they have better macaroni in the recovery room. She said this to Ethan with the specific gravity of someone delegating an important task. I'll look into it personally, he said. She seemed satisfied. She held Professor against her chest. At the doors to the surgical prep area, the nurses gently explained that only one parent could come through, and Clara went. Ethan stood at the doors and watched Clara lean down and say something to Lily that he couldn't hear, and Lily nodded, and then she looked back at him past Clara's shoulder. She lifted Professor's remaining-eyed face in his direction. A small wave. From the bear. He lifted his hand back. The doors closed. He walked back to the family room and sat down in the vinyl chair and looked at the wall, and did not do anything productive for 2 hours and 47 minutes, which was how long the surgery took. Dr. Bright came out and found them both at 10:53. He sat down across from them and folded his hands and said, It went well. She's in recovery. She did well. And then he said, She woke up mid-recovery and asked if someone had checked on the macaroni situation. Clara put her hands over her face. We told her we'd look into it, Dr. Bright said. Ethan laughed. The real kind again, the kind that arrived before he decided to produce it. Clara laughed too, into her hands, and it had the crack through it he'd noticed before. The repaired mug quality. But it was real, and it was there, and it lasted longer than it needed to for the joke. They let Clara go in first. Ethan waited in the family room for another 40 minutes, and then a nurse came and said Lily was asking for both her parents, and he walked down the corridor and into the recovery room, and she was there, smaller than ever in the recovery bed, pale and tired and hooked to more monitors than before, but awake. And when she saw him, her face did the brightening thing. Did you check? She said. Her voice was rough from the breathing tube, scratchy and lower than usual. I checked, he said. They said they'd try. Okay. She closed her eyes, opened them again. Professor was good, she said. I told him about the surgery while they were doing it. Could he hear you? I don't know, she said, but I think it helped me. She shifted slightly against the pillow. I thought about the ducks, she said. While they were doing it, I thought about Biscuit and Margot and whether Gerald had been rude to anyone lately. I can check on that too, he said. That would be good. Her eyes were getting heavy. Will you be here when I wake up? Yeah, he said. I'll be here. Both of you? He looked at Clara, who was sitting on the other side of the bed with her hand over Lily's hand. Clara looked back at him. Something passed between them that wasn't a decision exactly, but was the acknowledgement of one, the understanding that whatever the shape of what they were to each other, they were going to be in the same room for this child, and that was not negotiable, and that neither of them wanted it to be. Both us, Clara said. Lily's eyes closed. Her breathing evened out into the deep, pulled undersleep of someone whose body has been through something significant and needs to be somewhere other than consciousness for a while. The monitors kept their rhythm. Professor was wedged under her arm. Ethan sat on his side of the bed, and Clara sat on hers, and the room was quiet, in the particular way of medical spaces where something difficult has just resolved. Not peaceful exactly, but relieved, the air carrying the aftermath of sustained fear letting go of itself. After a while, Clara said quietly, so as not to wake Lily, she said something before they took her in, when I was leaning down to talk to her. What did she say? She said... Clara stopped. Her voice was doing the compression thing. She waited until it stabilized. She said, Mama, now we're 3, right? Like a real 3. She looked at Lily's sleeping face. I don't know exactly what she meant by real 3. I think she meant it differently than it sounds. Maybe, Ethan said. Or maybe she meant exactly what she said. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then, maybe. The recovery was not linear. That was the honest version of what the following 4 weeks looked like. Lily came home after 5 days in post-surgical monitoring, which was good, which was ahead of the projected timeline, but home was not the same as recovered, and the restrictions, no running, limited stairs, no rough play, reduced activity, were a particular kind of misery for a child whose natural mode of being in the world was physical and fast and completely indifferent to caution. The first week home, she was compliant because she was still tired. The second week, she was bored and began testing the edges of what compliant meant. She discovered that no running did not technically prohibit what she described as fast walking with enthusiasm. And Clara discovered this at the same moment Ethan did, when they both looked up from the kitchen table where they'd been drinking coffee and saw Lily moving through the living room at a speed that was clearly in the spirit of running, even if the letter of it was debatable. Lily, Clara's voice. I'm walking, Lily said, not slowing down. You are walking very fast. Enthusiasm, Lily said. She disappeared around the corner. They heard her negotiating something with Professor in the next room. Clara looked at Ethan. He looked at his coffee. Neither of them said anything for a moment. She's going to be fine, Ethan said. She's going to give me a heart condition of my own, Clara said. He had been spending more time at Clara's apartment. It had happened gradually. In the first days after Lily came home, Clara hadn't been able to manage everything alone and hadn't tried to, and he'd been there, and then the pattern of him being there had established itself the way patterns do, quietly, without a formal decision being made. He was careful about it. He understood that his being present in the apartment was not the same as anything being decided between him and Clara, and he tried not to act in ways that blurred that line, to assume warmth that hadn't been offered, to treat the practical reality of shared caretaking as something more emotionally resolved than it was. Clara was also careful. He noticed that. She was careful in the way of someone managing multiple things simultaneously: Lily's recovery, her own complicated feelings about Ethan, the question of what the future shape of their lives was going to look like. She was not cold, but she was measured, and he respected that, and he didn't push. What they had settled into by the 3rd week was something functional and honest and not entirely comfortable. They took turns on the night checks. They cooked in the same kitchen, him more competently than either of them had expected, which Lily declared was because he had been practicing to impress her, and which he denied and which was at least partially true. They watched Lily's television programs with her in the evenings, long serialized animated things with complicated mythology that Lily explained with the patience of someone addressing people who were clearly behind. And they sat on opposite ends of the couch, and sometimes Clara fell asleep before Lily did, which told him how tired she really was underneath the managing. On a Thursday in the third week, after Lily was in bed and Clara had put the dishes away, and the apartment had gone quiet, she came and sat in the chair across from where he was on the couch, and she said, without preamble, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, even if the honest answer is something I don't want to hear." "Okay," he said. "Are you here because of Lily, or are you here because of me?" He looked at her. She was holding her own hands in her lap, not as a defensive gesture, but as something to do with them, a way of keeping herself still. "Both," he said. She waited. "Lily is the reason I came back into your life," he said. "She's the reason I walked through those diner doors, and the reason I sat in that park, and the reason I was in the hospital at 5 in the morning. That's true. But being around you—" He stopped, tried to do the thing she'd asked him to do in the beginning, to not perform this, to just say it plainly. "Being around you has reminded me of something I spent 5 years trying to convince myself wasn't real. And I'm not telling you that because I want something from you. I'm telling you because you asked me to be honest, and that's the honest answer." Clara was quiet for a long time. "I'm not there yet," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't know if I'll ever be there. What you did, what happened, it's not the kind of thing that just resolves because the circumstances have changed." "I know. I look at you sometimes," she said, "and I see the person I loved, and then I see the person who had me escorted out of his building while I was carrying his daughter. And those are the same person, and I don't know what to do with that yet." "You don't have to do anything with it yet." "I know I don't have to." She looked at him directly. "But I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know where I am. So you're not—" She paused. "So you're not waiting for something that might not come." He nodded. "I appreciate that." She looked at her hands. "What did you do with Victoria?" The shift in subject was deliberate. He understood. She'd said what she needed to say and was moving to safer ground, and he let her. "I had a conversation with the board about the Meridian conflict. Marcus resigned from Vail Consulting and the contract was reviewed. Legally, Marcus is cooperating with the review, which limits what follows. And Victoria—" He paused. "Victoria and I are not currently speaking. Does that bother you?" "Yes," he said honestly. "She's my mother. The fact that she did what she did doesn't stop her from being my mother. That's an uncomfortable thing to hold." Clara nodded slowly. "She called me," she said. He stilled. "When?" "2 weeks ago, while Lily was still in the hospital." Clara looked up. "She didn't apologize. I want to be clear. It wasn't an apology. She said she had reconsidered some of her actions and that she would like to meet Lily at some point if I was open to it." Clara paused. "She said, and I'm quoting directly, 'I understand that my methodology was flawed.' Methodology." She said the word with a dry precision that carried 5 years of weight. He exhaled. "What did you say?" "I said I would think about it." She met his eyes. "I haven't thought about it yet. I've had other things to think about." He understood. He didn't press. Later, when he was putting on his jacket to leave, Lily's voice came from the bedroom. "Is my dad leaving?" Delivered at the volume children use when they think they're whispering and are not. Clara looked at him. He looked at the bedroom door. "Yeah, Bug," he called. "I'll be back Saturday." "Okay." A pause. "Professor says okay, too." "Tell Professor I'll bring the good macaroni." A longer pause. Then, "From where?" "I'll find someplace good. It has to be the right kind, not the kind with the powder." "Got it. The real cheese kind." "I understand the requirement." Satisfied silence from the bedroom. Clara was looking at the floor with the almost smile he'd come to recognize as the one she didn't quite mean to have. "The real cheese kind," she said quietly. "High stakes," he said. She walked him to the door. They stood in the doorway for a moment in the way they'd been standing in doorways and by elevators and at park gates, in the space before leaving that kept accumulating something neither of them had named. Saturday, she said. Saturday, he said. He went down the stairs and out into the street, and the November air hit him, sharp and cold and clean, and he walked to his car thinking about macaroni and cheese and the real kind versus the powder kind, and the way a 4-year-old who had just had open-heart surgery managed to have strong opinions about it, and the way a woman he had once loved and failed terribly had looked at him tonight with something in her face that was not yet what he hoped it might eventually be, but was not entirely closed either. He thought about what Lily had said in the recovery room, in her rough post-surgical voice. Now we're 3, right? Like a real 3. He thought about what it meant to build something real. Not to announce it, not to perform it, not to arrive with a plan and execute it. Just to show up, in the kitchen, in the hospital room, in the park by the ducks, on one end of the couch during the complicated animated mythology program. To do the small, unglamorous, invisible work of being present for people who had already learned to live without you, and to understand that the work itself was the point, not the recognition of it. He had a long way still to go. He knew that. He also knew he was going to show up on Saturday with the right kind of macaroni, and that Lily would conduct a serious evaluation of it, and that Clara would watch from the kitchen doorway with her hands around her coffee and the almost smile, and that these small, ordinary moments were not the consolation prize for the larger thing he'd hoped for. They were the larger thing. He just hadn't known that until he almost missed them entirely. December came in cold and without apology, the way winters do in a city that has no patience for gradual transitions. The trees along Clement Street had gone bare, and the park where Ethan had first pushed Lily on the swings was gray and windswept on the mornings he drove past it. But Lily was cleared for outdoor activity by the second week of the month and declared immediately that Gerald and the others had probably suffered from a lack of proper supervision in her absence, and that the situation required assessment. So they went back to the park. All 3 of them, on a Saturday morning with the cold coming off the water and their breath visible in the air, and Lily walked ahead with the authority of someone returning to a post they'd been temporarily relieved of. She found the ducks within 4 minutes. Gerald, she announced, had clearly been causing problems. She could tell by the way he was positioned at the edge of the group with the particular posture of someone who had recently done something they weren't sorry about. Biscuit and Margot appeared fine. The 2 unnamed ducks had, in her absence, apparently formed an alliance, which she found both reasonable and slightly suspicious. Ethan stood beside Clara watching their daughter conduct her assessment of the duck situation, and Clara had her hands in her pockets and her chin slightly tucked against the cold, and neither of them said anything for a moment because the moment didn't require it. "She looks good," Clara said finally. "She does," he said. Lily had crouched down at the water's edge and was speaking to Gerald directly, in the measured tone of someone delivering a formal notice. Whatever Gerald's crimes had been, he was being informed of them. "The cardiologist said her numbers at the last check were better than projected," Clara said. "He used the word excellent, which apparently he almost never uses." "I know. He told me the same." Clara glanced at him sideways. "You've been calling him." "He said I could call with questions." "He probably meant once or twice." "He's never said stop calling," Ethan said. Clara looked back at Lily. The almost smile was there. He'd stopped trying not to notice it. They walked the path around the pond while Lily ran her inspection, and the cold air moved around them, and Ethan thought about the conversation he'd been having with himself for 3 weeks. The thing he needed to say to Clara. The question of when and how and whether the timing was right, or whether waiting for the right timing was just another way of not doing the thing that needed doing. He had a small box in the inside pocket of his jacket. He'd been carrying it for 6 days, which was probably too long to carry something without either giving it or putting it away. But he hadn't been able to do either. It wasn't a proposal. He needed to be clear about that with himself, and would need to be clear about it with her. He knew better than to arrive at this point in their history with the assumption that what he felt entitled him to ask for what he wanted. The box contained the ring, Clara's ring, the one from their marriage, the one she had sold in Portland in the first year because she needed the money, and because keeping it had felt like holding on to something that had been designed to hurt her. He had found it through a jeweler who specialized in estate pieces, had described it in enough detail. He remembered every detail, had apparently been storing them for 5 years without knowing he was doing it, that the jeweler had located it within 2 weeks. It had taken him another 3 weeks to decide what to do with it. He wasn't giving it back as a proposal. He was giving it back because it was hers, because it had been taken from her along with everything else, and returning it was not about what he was asking for, but about what had been wrongly removed. That was what he told himself. He also knew that it was both of those things at once, and that the honesty he owed Clara required him to say so. Lily came running back to them, real running now, cleared for it, her red coat open despite the cold because she generated her own weather, and announced that Gerald had received his formal notice and that the unnamed ducks needed names, and she had decided they were called Theodore and Sue. Theodore and Sue, Clara repeated. Theodore is serious and Sue is unpredictable, Lily explained. You can tell by looking. Ethan looked at the two ducks in question. One of them was standing very still. The other one had just walked into the water at an angle that suggested poor planning. That tracks, he said. Lily seemed gratified. She took both their hands, his left, Clara's right, without asking or announcing she was going to do it, just reached up and took them, and walked between them down the path with the complete ease of someone for whom this was the natural order of things, as if the three of them had always walked like this, as if no time had been lost, as if the space between them was not the product of damage, but just the ordinary space between people who belonged together. Ethan looked across Lily's head at Clara. Clara was looking down at Lily with an expression that was private and full, and then she looked up and met his eyes, and something passed between them that had no words attached and didn't need any. They stayed in the park for an hour and a half. On the way out, Lily stopped at the gate and looked back at the pond with the expression of someone conducting a final check. Theodore's going to be trouble, she said. You don't know that yet, Clara said. I have a feeling, Lily said, with the unassailable confidence of a person who trusts their feelings about ducks. They walked back to Clara's apartment because Lily wanted lunch and had specific ideas about what lunch should be, and Ethan had learned by now not to suggest alternatives when Lily had specific ideas, because the path of least resistance was almost always also the more interesting one. He made grilled cheese, the real kind she had specified, with the actual cheese, building on the macaroni precedent, and Lily sat at the kitchen counter and supervised and offered commentary, and Clara made soup from the leftover vegetables in the refrigerator, and the apartment smelled like something warm and ordinary, and it occurred to Ethan that ordinary was not a lesser thing than he had once thought it was. He had spent the years of his marriage and the years after it treating ordinary as what happened in between the things that mattered. The big decisions, the significant transactions, the events that would be worth reporting to someone. The ordinary had been background noise, the connective tissue he moved through on his way to something else. He understood now that he had been looking at it from entirely the wrong angle. The ordinary was the whole of it, the soup and the grilled cheese, and the child explaining the correct supervision of ducks, and the woman moving around a kitchen she'd made her own through 5 years of singular effort. This was the entirety of what a life was made of, and he had walked away from it once without understanding what he was leaving. After lunch, Lily declared she needed a rest, which meant she needed 20 minutes lying on her bed with Professor and the Otter book before she would be prepared to do anything else. And she went to her room with the dignity of someone making a considered executive decision. Clara started cleaning up the lunch dishes. Ethan stood in the kitchen and looked at the window and decided that whatever the timing was, this was it. I need to give you something, he said. Clara turned from the sink. She looked at him, his face, the set of his expression, and whatever she saw there made her dry her hands on the dish towel slowly and turn to face him fully. He reached into his jacket and took out the box and set it on the counter between them. She looked at it. She didn't move toward it. Open it, he said, and let me explain before you say anything. She came to the counter and opened the box. He watched her face when she saw the ring, the small movement across it, the quick controlled intake of breath, the way her hand came up and then didn't touch it. That's my ring, she said. Yes. Where did you... It took some finding. He kept his voice steady. I want to be clear about what this is and what it isn't. It's not a proposal. I'm not standing here asking you to be something we haven't earned our way back to. I know we haven't. He paused. I'm giving it back because it was yours. Because you had to sell it to survive a situation that was engineered to make you vulnerable, and it shouldn't have been taken from you, and it's yours regardless of what you decide about anything else. Clara looked at the ring in the box for a long moment. Her jaw was doing the thing. And the other part, she said quietly. You said what it isn't. What is it? He held her gaze. It's me telling you that I still love you. I'm not asking you to do anything with that. I know what I did with your trust, and I know what it cost, and I know you have every reason to decide that what we had is something you buried and moved on from, and I will support that decision, and I will be here for Lily, regardless of it. But you asked me to be honest with you from the beginning, and I'm being honest. I love you. I never stopped. And I spent 5 years telling myself I did because it was easier than sitting with what I'd thrown away. The kitchen was very quiet. Clara stood at the counter with the open box and the ring and his words between them, and he let the silence be what it was and did not try to fill it. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. She looked at the ring again. I'm angry, she said. I need you to know that. Not the way I was in the first year. That was something different. That was grief wearing anger's clothes. I mean something quieter than that. I'm angry in the way that lives underneath things and comes up at random moments. When Lily has a nightmare and I'm the only one there. When I had to figure out the school enrollment forms alone because I didn't know the system in Portland. When she had her first real friend and I had no one to tell who would understand what it meant. She paused. I'm going to be angry about those things for a while. I know, he said, and I'm going to need you to let me be angry without it becoming a negotiation about whether the anger is still warranted. I know, he said again. She looked at the ring one more time. She reached out and closed the box with 2 fingers slowly, and then she picked it up and held it in her palm. I'm not putting it on today, she said. Okay. I don't know when. She looked up at him. Maybe at some point, or maybe I'll just keep it because it's mine and because it's a good ring and I always liked it. I don't know yet. That's fine, he said. All of that is fine. She nodded. She set the box on the kitchen window sill, in a patch of winter light that came through the glass and caught the small facets of it, and she stood looking at it for a moment and then turned back to the dishes. He picked up a dish towel and dried. They worked in the same small kitchen, in the comfortable proximity of people who have learned the geography of each other's movement, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the silence was not empty. I told Lily about Victoria, Clara said after a while. Not the details, just that she had a grandmother on her father's side who lived in the city. He stopped drying. How did she take it? She asked if the grandmother liked ducks. Clara's voice was carefully neutral, which meant she was managing something. I said I didn't know. She said that was going to be an important determining factor. He absorbed this. Victoria called me last week, he said. She asked about Lily. She didn't ask directly. She never does anything directly. But that was what it was. He paused. I think she is doing something that, for Victoria, constitutes reckoning. I don't know what to do with that yet. Neither do I, Clara said. But I think... She stopped, rinsed a bowl, started again. I think Lily should get to decide eventually, when she's old enough to understand enough of it, whether she wants a relationship with Victoria. That shouldn't be our decision. He thought about this. That's generous. It's not generous, Clara said. It's just, Lily didn't do anything wrong. She shouldn't be limited by the things we did and didn't do. Her relationship should be her own. She handed him a wet bowl to dry. That includes her relationship with you. I want you to know that I'm not managing your access to her. I said that at the beginning, and I mean it differently now. You're her father. That's not conditional on where you and I land. He dried the bowl. Thank you, he said, and meant it as the full and complicated thing it was. From Lily's room came the sound of the Otter book being read aloud to Professor, the specific rhythm of a child narrating to a stuffed animal with complete seriousness. They could hear individual words when she spoke louder. The otter who lied about reading the map had apparently been confronted by the others, and the situation was reaching some kind of resolution, delivered with appropriate gravity. Clara listened to it with her hands in the dishwater, and a look on her face that Ethan recognized now as the one she wore when Lily was in another room and couldn't see her, the unguarded version, the one she didn't have to manage. She's something, Ethan said. She really is, Clara said. She's like... She paused, searching for it. She's like if you took everything that was hard about the last 5 years and it somehow became a person. Does that make sense? She's the thing that made all of it worth doing. Not because she erases it, but because she exists and she's exactly who she is. And I look at her and I think, okay, I did that. That's real. He thought about what it meant to do a thing alone that should have been shared, and to have it turn out extraordinary anyway, and to know that the extraordinary part was entirely yours. You did that, he said. I want you to know I understand that. Whatever comes next, I know that what she is came from you. Clara looked at the window where the ring box sat in the pale winter light. She didn't say anything for a moment. She came from both of us, she said finally. It was the second time she'd said it. This time it landed differently. Not as a concession, but as something she'd arrived at on her own terms and had decided she meant. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had Professor under one arm, and her hair had come mostly out of the pigtails, and she looked at both of them with the evaluating expression she brought to things she was trying to understand. Are you two talking about me? She asked. We're talking about how remarkable you are, Clara said. Lily considered this. That's acceptable, she said. She came into the kitchen and climbed onto the counter stool and looked at the ring box on the windowsill. What's that? Ethan and Clara looked at each other. Something that belongs to your mom, Ethan said. I was returning it. Lily looked at the box, then at her mother, then at Ethan, the focused, unblinking assessment. Is it jewelry? Yes, Clara said. Is it nice jewelry? It is, Ethan said. Lily nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. Okay, she said. She turned her attention back to Professor. The otters worked out their problem, she announced. The one who was lying about reading the map admitted it, and they were all upset for a while, but then they figured out together that none of them could read otter map language, and so they needed to try something different. That's actually a good resolution, Ethan said. It took them a while, Lily said, but they got there. She said it with the practical satisfaction of someone who has faith in the general ability of characters she likes to eventually figure things out, given enough time and sufficient honesty. He looked at Clara. Clara was looking at their daughter with her whole face open, nothing managed, nothing held back, just the full weight of how much she loved this particular small person who named ducks and kept tape in her shoe and evaluated situations with the careful fairness of someone who had decided early that the world deserved her genuine attention. Then Clara looked up and met Ethan's eyes. And what was in her face was not the managed version, not the careful guarded version, but something closer to the woman he had known before he'd been given every reason to lose her, something tired and real and still standing. They didn't resolve everything that afternoon. That would be the dishonest version of this story, and this story had enough dishonesty in its history without adding more at the end. They didn't arrive at a declaration, or a plan, or a clean understanding of what they were going to be to each other. Those things were still ahead of them, still to be negotiated in the slow, uncertain, occasionally frustrating way that real things between damaged people get negotiated. What happened was smaller than that. What happened was that Lily decided she wanted to go back to the park to check on Theodore, who she felt had been left unsupervised long enough, and they all put their coats back on and went, the three of them, out into the cold December afternoon. And Lily walked between them and took both their hands again without asking, the same easy proprietary claim she'd made before. And Ethan felt the small weight of her hand in his left hand and looked across at Clara, who was looking down at Lily and then up at him. And the winter light was thin and cold, and the park ahead of them was bare and brown, and Theodore was probably doing something inadvisable near the water, and none of it was what he'd imagined his life looking like 5 years ago. It was better, not easier, not resolved, not healed in the clean way that stories sometimes pretend healing works, where one good conversation or one returned ring or one honest admission resets everything to zero and lets people begin again unencumbered. That's not what healing is. Healing is Clara still being angry in the underneath way, and Ethan knowing he deserves that anger and both of them choosing to be in the same park anyway. Healing is a child who has had open-heart surgery running ahead to check on a duck. She's named the door because the world is interesting and she intends to be in it fully. Healing is the ring box sitting on a kitchen windowsill without being opened, in a patch of winter light, waiting for the right moment without demanding one. There are things this story wants to say, standing at this end of it. Not lessons exactly. Lessons are too clean for what actually happened here. But there are things worth naming. The first is this. There is a particular kind of arrogance that does not feel like arrogance when you are inside it. It feels like certainty. It feels like knowing your own mind, like protecting yourself, like being a person with standards who refuses to be made a fool of. Ethan Calloway did not think of himself as a cruel man on the day he signed those papers. He thought of himself as a man who had been wronged and was responding accordingly. He was decisive, he was efficient, he moved the situation forward. These are qualities that get praised in business and in men, and that can function, in the wrong circumstances, as cover for refusing to do the harder thing, which is to slow down and question yourself and sit inside your own uncertainty long enough to find out if you might be wrong. He was wrong. And the cost of his wrongness was not distributed evenly. Clara paid it. Lily paid it, in the particular way that children pay for things, which is by growing up without something they needed and adapting and becoming someone who could survive the absence, which is not the same as never needing it. The second thing is this. Clara Whitmore did not come back to this city to forgive Ethan Calloway. She came back because Lily was going to start school, and because she knew people here, and because Portland had served its purpose, and it was time to move. That Ethan was here was a fact she had decided she could manage. She was not wrong about that. She could have managed it. She could have maintained the careful distance that she'd put between herself and anything that could hurt her again, and she would have been entirely justified in doing so, and no one who knew her history could have blamed her for it. What she chose instead was harder. Not forgiveness as a gift to him. He needs to understand that, and does understand it, which is how she knows he has actually changed. Forgiveness as something she chose for herself. The decision to let the anger coexist with the willingness to see who he was becoming. The decision not to let what was done to her determine every choice she made afterward. That's not sainthood. That's not the erasure of the damage. That's a woman who went through something that would have leveled a lot of people and came out the other side still capable of deciding who she was going to be, on her own terms, without asking anyone's permission. The third thing, and maybe the most important, children see clearly. They see what adults have learned to talk around, what adults have wrapped in the protective language of complication and history, and it's not that simple. Lily looked at a man in the rain and saw her father. She looked at a hospital bed and said, "Now we're three," like a real three. She held both their hands in the park, not as a wish for something that didn't exist, but as a recognition of something that did. Children know when something is real. The tragedy is only that adults take so long to catch up. Theodore was, in fact, doing something inadvisable near the water. He had found a piece of bread that someone had thrown for the ducks, and had positioned himself between it and the rest of the group with the body language of someone who intended to keep it. Lily stood at the edge of the pond and regarded this with her hands on her hips. "Theodore," she said. Theodore did not respond. "You have to share," she told him. "That's the rule." He remained unmoved. Sue waited toward him from the left, which Lily acknowledged as a good tactical decision. Gerald watched from a distance with what might have been satisfaction at not being the subject of the intervention for once. "Theodore's going to be trouble," Ethan said, repeating her prediction from the morning. "I told you," Lily said without turning around. Clara looked at Ethan sideways. He looked back at her. She shook her head slowly in the way of someone who finds the situation both exasperating and entirely unsurprising, and it was the most relaxed he'd seen her face in months, and he thought that was worth more than most of the things he'd spent the last 5 years accumulating. They stayed at the park until the lights started going, which in December happened fast, the afternoon compressing without much warning into the blue-gray early dark. Lily delivered a final verdict on Theodore, suspended judgment pending future behavior, and they walked back through the gate together. At the corner where their paths diverged, his car, her apartment 2 blocks north, they stopped. Lily immediately identified a crack in the sidewalk that required investigation and crouched down to look at it, which gave them a moment of the particular privacy that exists when a child is occupied. "Thank you for today," Clara said, not with the formal politeness of the early weeks, something more worn in and genuine. "Thank you for letting me be there," he said. She looked at him for a moment in the early dark, the city sounds around them, the December cold. She opened her mouth, closed it, seemed to reconsider. "Ask me again," she said finally. "Not now, not today. But at some point, when we've had more time, when things have settled, ask me again." She held his gaze. "I'm not saying yes. I'm not saying I know what I'm going to say. I'm saying don't assume the door is closed." He held very still. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. Lily stood up from the crack investigation. "There's an aunt," she announced. "In December. That's unusual. I think he's lost." "What should we do about him?" Ethan asked. Lily considered the aunt with the full weight of her attention. "Leave him," she said. "Sometimes you have to figure out your own way back." She looked up at both of them with the clear, uncomplicated gaze of someone who has said something that seemed obvious to her and cannot quite understand why adults seem to find it remarkable. Then she reached up and took Clara's hand, and she looked at Ethan, and without saying anything, she reached her other hand toward him. He took it, and the three of them stood on that corner in the December dark for a moment. Not perfectly, not without history, not without the specific weight of everything that had happened to get them there. And then they started walking, and the city moved around them, and the lights were coming on, and Theodore was probably still being unreasonable about the bread. And somewhere in a kitchen in Portland, there was a chapter of the Otter story still unresolved, and the ringbox sat on the windowsill waiting in the patient, unhurried way of things that know their moment is still coming. This is not a story about how love fixes people. Love does not fix people. People fix themselves, slowly and badly and with considerable backsliding. And love is what's there when they look up from the work and need to know someone is still in the room. Ethan Callaway spent 5 years building things that looked like success and feeling in the quiet spaces between them, like something was wrong with the accounting without being able to find the error. The error was this: he had confused moving forward with moving away. He had called it strength when it was avoidance. He had called it decisive when it was afraid. And the cost of that confusion was paid by people who had not made his mistakes and did not deserve to bear his consequences. He cannot get those years back. Nobody gets years back. What he has is the years ahead, which is what everybody has, which is simultaneously all you need and never quite enough. He intends to show up for them. Not perfectly, not without failure, but with the kind of consistent, unglamorous, present-tense effort that is the only thing that actually means anything in the long run. Clara Whitmore raised a daughter alone through things that would have justified bitterness, and chose not to be bitter, not because she didn't have the right to it, but because she decided who she was going to be on the other side of what happened to her. She is still deciding. The deciding doesn't stop. But she is standing on a corner in December with her daughter's hand in hers, and the man who failed her walking beside her, and she is here, which is the whole of what courage has ever meant. And Lily, who named the ducks and assessed Theodore's character from 30 feet away, and kept tape in her shoe for safekeeping, and told a nurse that Patience was just waiting with better posture, and asked her mother if they were 3 now, like a real 3. Lily is 4 years old and has already understood the most important thing, which is that you hold on to the people you want to keep, you use both hands, and you do not let go on the sidewalk just because the destination is unclear. Nobody is allowed to walk away. She said it once, in passing, the way children say the things that matter most. Simply, without drama, as if it were just the obvious rule that everyone already knew. Nobody is allowed to walk away. Ethan held her hand in his on the December sidewalk and thought that he had heard better advice in his life, and smarter advice, and advice delivered by people with considerably more authority, but he had never heard any that he intended to keep more carefully. The city lit up around them as they walked, and the night came on, and somewhere in the park behind them, Theodore made his choice about the bread. And the story continued the way all real stories do. Not with an ending exactly, but with people still in it, still trying, still present, moving forward through the ordinary, extraordinary difficulty of staying.